Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you very warmly to our today's evening discussion. On geopolitical security dynamics. With me in the studio, Dr. Joanna Sikiera, international lawyer. Hello, Joanna.
Hello to you. Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
And also with us in the studio, our expert Maciej Tyburski. Welcome, Maciej.
Good evening. Thank you for having me today.
Well, I believe that we can all agree that we live in a very dynamic, changing reality. And to be honest, the only thing that is still somehow certain is actually the change. So I have a very, let's say, broad question to you. So what do you think? What are the main security challenges that we are facing today? Not just as a Poland, but from a broader perspective, what are the biggest security challenges, Joanna?
Thank you very much for this question. As you pointed, it's not only about us Poles living in Poland, but globally, because we live in a global village. Everything what is happening on the other continent sooner or later will affect us. As I deal with mainly Indo-Pacific, you can see the map over there. I will claim that those challenges and rivalry between big powers, mainly US and China, and their like-minded partners, they will affect us. What I mean here, I mean the competition, not only military and economics, because this is happening now, but also values. So our free world based on democratic principles versus authoritarian regimes like China, Russia, North Korea, Syria, Venezuela, and I could move on. So not only states threat, but also non-state actors threat. So threats to our freedoms, our rights, including freedom of speech. And that's very a tricky point because it's hard to say that this is exactly a breach of freedom of speech, but we all can sense that. And that's also an issue of my research on legal culture. So culture, what is important for each society.
Thank you very much. And Maciej, from your perspective, what are the biggest security challenges that we are facing right now?
Before answering your question, it is important to underline that 2024 is coming, and for geopolitical point of view, for the geopolitical map of the world, it's important to say that next year we will have American elections, Indian elections, Pakistani presidential elections, European Parliament elections, and of course Russian presidential elections. So the architecture of security for upcoming years will be determined more or less by the changes that will affect it in the upcoming year. This will be the most politically important year of the decade. So the results will be volatile for our perspective. Of course, we need to mention there the position of the so-called swing countries, so not particularly affiliated with any of power. Here, I mean, for example, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, or Turkey. But coming back to your question about biggest issues that are incoming, here I would start with, of course, military issues, as we are experiencing now the war in Ukraine or Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Moreover, an incoming energy crisis, which is followed by economy and the economic competition between countries. Additionally, we already had a migration crisis, but looking at the situation in the world, we may expect more migrants coming to Europe, especially from Africa or Middle East. Additionally, as it was already mentioned by Joanna Sikiera here, we will see a lot of imperial ambitions of countries. Like we can expect some political movements from China, more and more aggressive politics from Russia. Therefore, in my opinion, the next year will be more and more challenging, and we need to prepare for that.
So we need to prepare for that. But to be honest, how we can prepare for that, especially if we're looking, let's say, at the American elections, we don't really know what will happen, and we don't know actually if the US will still support Ukraine, and let's say if US will decide to shift its main focus, for example, into the Indo-Pacific, what Europe should do. I don't really believe that Europe is ready to take care of Ukraine on our own, because as you mentioned, the military expenses are quite high, and I don't really see big economic power to spend a huge amount on this sector. So Joanna, what do you think, like how we should actually prepare from the European perspective?
Again, I'm very happy that we are having this conversation beyond Europe, because again, decision making centers, the true ones, are outside of Europe. This is anyhow Brussels. We are too little. Europocentrism is already gone. This century is anyhow about Europe. And therefore, I am really concerned why countries like Poland does not have Indo-Pacific policy. A landlocked state like Czech Republic, but also our smaller neighbor Lithuania, they both have Indo-Pacific policy. So how to react, how to be prepared for any obstacles, challenges happening in the Indo-Pacific. So not only Taiwan versus China, but also India versus Pakistan. And I could move on with those threats. We are very much dependent on Chinese economy. We used to be dependent on Russian natural resources, but I will claim that still we are, because okay, we can cut off gas and oil, but how about diamonds, ladies and gentlemen? How about gold from Russia? Those are not sanctions materials, because Western European countries, they need that, and they feel good about buying those materials directly from this authoritarian regime, being Russia. And as you mentioned, also Ukraine. Yes, I really believe that this war is already over, in a sense that international decision makers will focus elsewhere, and not only in Taiwan, but also in Africa. We have drug cartels in South America. So I truly think that unfortunately for Ukrainians, that would be another frozen conflict like in Transnistria. I personally visited too, and Georgia, the same 20% country occupied by Russia. Nobody cares, nobody does anything about that.
Exactly, and I would also add, of course, the diamonds and gold, but I believe the LPG will be sanctions probably since the next year, but still countries in the EU are importing it because it is not under sanctions and nobody really cares about it. So I totally agree, and the Indo-Pacific policy should be implemented, but also what about the African policy? Especially if we are looking at the fact that by 2040 the demand for the rare earth elements will increase most likely 7-fold, and for lithium 42nd-fold. So that's a huge number, and Africa has a lot of them. In the EU we don't really have them, so maybe we should also focus on this region. Maciej, what do you think, how we should how our policy should look like, how we should prepare ourselves for those incoming challenges?
Well, coming back to the question you've addressed to Joanna first, when it comes to American policy towards the current threats, especially war in Ukraine, it's difficult to judge now from the perspective before the elections, but let's remember that America will be, and already is, somehow divided into few conflicts. It's engaging in Middle East. It has a threat from Russian side, from China. In past we had economic conflict between US and and China. But here, let's focus on our region, which is Europe, that was already mentioned. Military, we are preparing for the threat coming from the east, but also since the beginning of Russian invasion, the countries of Central and Eastern Europe started preparing when it comes to energy and economic security. We started diversifying energy sources. We started building new strategic energy infrastructure. Additionally, is it good or bad? I'm not here to judge, but Russian invasion on Ukraine opened a new possibility for quicker accession of Ukraine and Western Balkans to the EU, which is a strategic point that has to be addressed here. We cannot have this blank point on the European map when it comes to Western Balkans. They are strategically important for European Union, especially now. But as we mentioned, Russian energy and resources import to the Europe, it's still a threat, and it's still the case, even though we are trying to minimize it. It even brings some smaller conflicts into the region. Let's remember the newest example of Serbia, Hungary, Bulgaria. Conflict, like small conflict on Bulgarian tax for Russian gas going to Serbia and Hungary. It's still a topic of debate at EU, as far as I'm concerned. We also mentioned the resources from China. The countries of our region are still dependent for China, and we are trying to somehow minimize this impact. Of course, there are initiatives like New Silk Road, where China tries to conduct more and more influence, economic, both, and political, by loans or strategic investments in those countries. So we need to somehow balance it. And just to sum up, we need, as a Europe, we need some kind of cohesion when it comes to strategic decisions, because if on one hand we are minimizing the Russian or Chinese influence in the region, on the other hand we cannot import a lot of energy from Russia, and it's still happening, as we mentioned, the diamond case. So this is still to be a topic of debate between our countries.
And do you think Europe can become competitive on the global scale? Because mainly, if we're talking about big world powers, it's US and China. Yeah. Do you think Europe can become a powerful player on the global scale, Jana?
No, definitely not. I think we
No,
wasted. Sorry. Maybe you expected other reply, but as we spoke previously, also during the conference organized by you, we are too little while others are growing in enormous pace. And they are surrounded with like-minded partners. US is backed up with Republic of Korea, with Japan, Australia, New Zealand. China is backed up with surrounding countries. Despite that they dislike each other, it doesn't matter as long as the balance, sums up on a benefit to China. And Europe is somewhere in between. So we cannot afford this neutrality. And also, I agree with Maciej said that if we will cut off the ties with China or Russia, then who will fill it? There is no place for vacuum in biology, in nature, but also in international relations. So how about coming back to US, but not only US to be pro-American, but simply pro-Western civilizations, to also have the ties with Asian tigers, Korea and Japan. I think we are still not using the allies and like-minded partners as we have, because probably we think it's too far. Maybe we have so different cultures to build something, but even like I am here in Wrocław, we have the largest LG factory in Europe. Many Korean families they came here to settle down, so I think we could invite those partners to Poland, to Europe. But then again, it requires a lot of, first of all, change in policy, not only pro-Russia or pro-China, but to open ourselves on other sources too.
You said that in Wrocław you have the LG factory. Well, next to Krakow, I'm not sure if it already started operating, but there will be kimchi factory. So,
Right.
yeah, not the same, but the same direction, let's say. And Maciej, will you be more optimistic than Joanna, or you also believe that we missed the moment and EU will not be really competitive on the global market?
Of course, I'm optimistic, but I am also realistic on that matter. So even though European Union is federalizing, is uniting into like one bigger, let's say, group of countries, and it's perceived sometimes on geopolitical area as a one entity, we need to remember that, as it was mentioned, Europe is somehow still in between the big imperial players. We've mentioned that US is backed up, Russia is also backed up, even though we have sanctions. China and Russia are closely cooperating, not only economically, but also military. When it comes to economy and trade, by the end of 2023, those two countries plan to reach over $200 billion of economic exchange. Military, this year at least few meetings were held between Russian and Chinese authorities on deepening the cooperation. And Europe placed on the map somewhere in between. We are still nearby Russia, especially Poland. We have close position to Kaliningrad, to Suwałki corridor. We are nearby NATO eastern flank. Even now, while extending the NATO and European Union, Russia is accusing the organizations of coming back to a Cold War regime by accessing Finland and possible accession of Sweden to the structure. And when it comes to competitiveness, not to repeat what you've just mentioned, I think the important factor will be the use of artificial intelligence when it comes to security infrastructure. Especially, it is not only about the use of offensive use of the technology, it's also about regulating it and somehow harnessing it, because definitely China will try to make a use of it in future politics. Therefore, we need somehow a common approach to the use of artificial intelligence in the new infrastructure that is coming.
But do you think that China would like to be in compliance with our regulations? I think we are quite famous for, implying more and more, regulations. Actually, we just adopted in the EU this new AI pact, and I have the feeling that if we will be regulating everything before actually it even started to somehow develop, I don't really see, the actual development here. I don't know. What do you think, Jana?
Exactly, this topic I touched when European Union adopted that. I was in Zurich University, and we were discussing AI policy, and there were also representatives from China, and Chinese colleagues said that this is obvious for Chinese Communist Party to discuss AI in democracy. That got me really bad, and I had to say something. I stood up and said, just to remind all of us here, every country, every state understands democracy differently, because for us democracy is also freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of navigation, meaning that this is anyhow a value to China, for example. So yes, we can codify AI, but then again, how about interpretation? How about possible sanctions? How about possible exclusion from the big team? So that poses a long list of legal and political questions, but also potential threat. How will that affect on us, ordinary users of AI?
Yeah, totally agree. And Maciej, would you add something?
Yes, just briefly from my side, what I've meant in the previous statement was that, of course, we may try to regulate it in Europe or European Union, but then from the East, nobody will suit to our regulations. Same with energy, we are regulating coal use or emissions, whereas Chinese emissions in comparison to European Union's emissions, this is just a different topic. So we may try to do something regionally, but globally, I think for now we, as European Union or Europe, we don't have that big power to force any changes for the global players. And we are still a little bit too small to impose some changes on those imperial states.
Yes, well, I totally agree with you. But on the other hand, I am, of course, maybe not that optimistic, but maybe I'm little bit more optimistic than you are. Just looking at the case of Apple, and do you remember the famous case of the chargers? We thought that it will not, be possible actually to force Apple to change the chargers, but at certain point, we were able to do so. So we are still perceived as an important market for some companies. So I don't want to leave our viewers with this, set perspective. But I totally agree with you that we need to be realistic and maybe, start acting rather than imposing new regulations and just, concerning about everything. So I would like to thank Joanna and Maciej for your today's attendance. It was very interesting event. I learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, it was a pleasure.
And I would like also to take this position to wish our observers Merry Christmas, filled with joy, peace, and prosperity. And I hope this season will bring warmth to our hearts and also cherish moments with the loved ones. Thank you very much.